In early 2023, a Chinese drama quietly premiered, released 8 episodes, and then vanished. No finale, no explanation, just silence. For most viewers, Justice in the Dark was declared dead, another BL-adjacent adaptation buried by censorship, controversy, or internal collapse. And then, nearly 2 years later, against all expectations, it came back. Not in China, but in Japan. Rebranded, rescheduled, and completed. So how does a drama die mid-air, and then finish its story abroad? Why this show, when so many others never returned? And what does this case tell us about how BL survives in 2025? This is Justice in the Dark, the Chinese BL that came back from the dead. Justice in the Dark is adapted from the Danmei novel Silent Reading, also known as Modu, written by Priest, one of the most influential authors in modern Chinese BL literature. While the original novel leans heavily into psychological profiling and introspection, the live-action adaptation reframes the story as a crime and suspense drama, with BL subtext carefully coded beneath the surface. The drama is set in a near-future society, Xinyuan civilization, year 253, where rising crime rates are linked to a controversial concept known as zero-degree empathy. Each case explores human behavior, trauma, and moral responsibility, positioning the series firmly as a psychological thriller rather than a romance. At the center of the story are Pei Su, the aloof heir to the Pei group, whose zero-degree empathy and traumatic past repeatedly entangle him in criminal investigations, and Luo Weijiao, the justice-driven captain of the Special Investigation Team's 6th Division, tasked with dismantling a growing web of violent crimes. Their relationship is not expressed through overt romance, but through proximity, tension, trust, and ideological conflict, a structure that allowed the adaptation to exist under censorship while remaining legible to fans of the original novel. The series starred Zhang Xincheng and Fu Xinbo, a pairing with significant mainstream credibility. This was not niche casting. Both actors were already established, which framed the project from the outset as a prestige crime drama rather than a fan service-driven BL adaptation. Behind the scenes, the production also carried weight. The series was produced by Yang Xia, the producer behind The Untamed, bringing with it expectations shaped by one of the most influential Danmei-era adaptations in recent Chinese television. In short, Justice in the Dark was never sold as just another BL. It was positioned as a serious crime drama, with a BL core deliberately embedded beneath its structure. And that framing is exactly what made what happened next so unexpected. Justice in the Dark began airing on Youku in China in February 2023. 8 episodes were released, and then it stopped. This wasn't a project halted before release. It had already aired, meaning it had cleared initial review. No delay notice, no finale announcement, no clear reason. Within days, the drama vanished from the release schedule, and the platform froze all further updates, leaving viewers with an unfinished story and no official explanation. Almost immediately, speculation filled the vacuum. Some pointed to BL-related censorship, placing the drama alongside other halted adaptations during China's tightening regulatory climate. Others focused on legal and corporate turmoil. Reports of lawsuits, copyright disputes, and production-side instability began circulating online. There were also peripheral controversies, including unrelated scandals and political sensitivities, which further muddied the waters. What mattered most wasn't which theory was correct. It was that none were confirmed. No statement from regulators, no formal cancellation notice, just silence. And in that silence, Justice in the Dark became something more than a paused drama. It became a mystery, one fans dissected, archived, and obsessed over, precisely because no one could say, with certainty, why it had disappeared. After Justice in the Dark vanished, one explanation quickly hardened into fact: that it had been pulled for being too gay. It made sense on the surface. The drama was adapted from a BL novel. BL adaptations had already been disappearing, and no official explanation was given. But here's the part that matters. That explanation was wrong. Justice in the Dark had already cleared review. It aired. It had passed the initial gate. What actually happened wasn't a sudden censorship strike. It was an operational collapse on the production side, unfolding in real time. By the time the drama stopped updating, the production company behind it was already facing multiple legal disputes. Court records showed ongoing cases involving unfair competition, copyright conflicts, and unpaid licensing fees. These weren't abstract rumors. They were active legal issues that placed the project in a fragile position while it was still airing. Then, in the middle of this instability, another controversy exploded into public view. Viewers discovered that an image used in the show's materials, a photo altered to represent a sex worker, was actually Rosé from BLACKPINK, used without permission. The art team responsible issued a public apology on Weibo, acknowledging the misuse and promising corrective action. And then the apology disappeared. The combination was devastating. A BL-adjacent drama, a production company already in legal trouble, and now an international celebrity image scandal involving reputation and copyright risk. At that point, the issue was no longer whether the drama was allowed to exist. It was whether any platform wanted to keep carrying the risk. In China's entertainment system, a project doesn't need to be officially banned to die. If the legal exposure becomes too high, the safest move is silence. So the updates stopped, the release schedule cleared, and Justice in the Dark disappeared. Not because of BL content, but because the production became too unstable to defend. The censorship narrative spread anyway, because it was emotionally believable. Fans were used to loss, and silence invites speculation. But the truth was messier, and far more damaging. Anonymous claims, amplified by hashtags and fear, filled the silence, not because they were proven, but because they felt believable. By mid-2023, the silence around Justice in the Dark stopped feeling temporary. Months had passed. No rescheduled air date, no platform clarification, no indication that the drama would ever return. And then, in July, the tone finally changed. Not through an official notice, but through the people who had made the show. A long post appeared on Weibo from someone on the production side. It didn't read like damage control. It didn't hint at negotiations or future plans. It read like a goodbye. The message spoke about years of work, constant uncertainty, and the exhaustion of holding on to a project that could no longer move forward. It acknowledged effort, loss, and trust, and framed the end not as a pause, but as something already decided. Soon after, the director shared his own message. There were no accusations, no public anger, just gratitude for the cast, the crew, and the chance to have told the story at all. The tone wasn't hopeful, it was resigned. Other quiet signals followed. Supporting actors posted memories. Behind-the-scenes photos resurfaced. Fans began archiving instead of waiting. What mattered wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. There was no language of awaiting approval, no talk of edits, no suggestion of a second attempt. In the world of Chinese entertainment, that distinction matters. Once a project is emotionally buried by the people who made it, it almost never comes back. By July 2023, Justice in the Dark was no longer treated as a delayed release. It was spoken about the way shelved BL-adjacent dramas usually are, as something finished without a finish. For the industry, it was another loss. For fans, it was confirmation. The story hadn't just stopped airing. It had ended, quietly, painfully, and without a finale. And at that point, no comeback was expected. No rescue was imagined. Justice in the Dark was declared dead. For nearly 2 years, Justice in the Dark existed only as a memory. 8 episodes, no ending, no future. Then quietly, something changed. By late 2024, news began circulating that the drama had been picked up by WOW, a Japanese premium broadcaster. Not for a remake, not for a recap, but to be completed. Under a new title, Kouen, Justice in the Dark resurfaced outside China. This was not a revival approved by Chinese regulators, but a separate overseas licensing deal for Japan. WOW had legally acquired the broadcast rights, allowing the series to air in full, even though it remained impossible to resume its release in its home market. In Japan, the project was treated as prestige niche programming, carefully scheduled, formally promoted, quietly completed. The Wow Wow broadcast began on March 7, 2025, and concluded on June 20, 2025, completing all 30 episodes, with the series made available through the platform until February 28, 2026. For the first time since its collapse in China, Justice in the Dark had an ending. In an industry where most shelved Chinese BL-adjacent dramas never return at all, that alone was extraordinary. But completion did not mean restoration. And that distinction matters. Completion did not mean restoration. Once the Wow Wow broadcast began, viewers quickly noticed that the version airing in Japan was not the drama as it was originally envisioned. This was not an uncensored release. It was not a director's cut. And it was not a return to the original Danmei text. What aired was a version shaped by restriction. Compared to expectations built around the novel, and even the early Chinese episodes, scenes felt tighter. Dialogue was trimmed. Emotional continuity was uneven. BL coding, already constrained in China, was no more explicit here. The story was complete, but it was not whole. This is where the phrase alive-ish becomes important. Justice in the Dark does exist. It has an ending, but it exists with limits. What returned was not the drama restored to its intended form, but the drama permitted to finish, carefully, quietly, and within narrow boundaries. In the context of Chinese BL-adjacent adaptations, that distinction matters, because survival does not mean recovery. It means the story was allowed to close, not to fully return. And that uneasy middle ground is exactly where Justice in the Dark now lives. Not dead, but not fully alive either. By the time Justice in the Dark finally reached its ending, the conversation around it had shifted. This was no longer just about a drama. It was about what viewers had been asked to endure. The fandom that gathered around Justice in the Dark wasn't reacting in a single direction. It fractured, not into enemies, but into different ways of coping with the same experience. Some viewers focused on relief. After years of waiting, the story was finally complete. For them, survival mattered more than purity. The fact that an ending existed at all felt like a small miracle in a landscape where most similar projects never return. Others focused on loss. They watched the later episodes and felt what was missing: emotional continuity, intimacy reduced to fragments, scenes that felt surgically trimmed. For these viewers, completion didn't erase the sense that something essential had been taken away. This is where the BL versus bromance debate hardened. Novel readers were clear. The source was Danmei. Censorship did not change that. A censored BL was still BL. Other viewers leaned into interpretation, framing the relationship as deep partnership, soulmates, or restrained devotion, not necessarily romance. What mattered wasn't which reading people chose. It was the boundary that emerged around it. Interpret it how you want, but don't deny where it came from. That line became an unspoken rule inside the fandom. At the same time, frustration with censorship stopped being abstract. It became scene-specific, structural, exhausting. Fans weren't just saying, "This is censored." They were saying, "This breaks the story. This deletes the emotional logic. This forces us to do the work the script can't show." And so they did. Viewers learned to read micro-expressions, pauses, eye contact, and restraint as the romance itself. Chemistry survived not because the text allowed it, but because the performances carried it. Access issues added another layer of strain. With no stable official subtitles, fans relied on fragmented sources, fan subs, and imperfect translations. Confusion wasn't just narrative, it was logistical. Watching the show became labor. And yet, the tone wasn't purely bitter. What's striking about the Justice in the Dark fandom isn't just anger, it's endurance. People stayed, they waited, they argued, clarified, corrected, and protected the space. By the end, fans weren't only watching a drama, they were watching censorship, industry politics, and the limits of what could be shown, all in real time. That's why Justice in the Dark didn't just finish as a show, it finished as a shared experience. One shaped as much by what survived as by what never made it to the screen. Justice in the dark didn't defeat censorship. It outlived it. For many BL fans, disappearance has become familiar. Stories air briefly, stall, or vanish, like Addicted, 2016, which never truly came back in its original form. That's why this case feels different. Justice in the dark didn't survive because the system changed. It survived because it left the system. Not through approval, not through reform, but through distance. Japan didn't restore the drama to what it was meant to be. It allowed it to finish, quietly, carefully, and within limits. And that distinction matters, because this isn't a victory story. It's a survival story. In 2025, Chinese BL doesn't move forward by breaking rules. It moves sideways, through loopholes, foreign markets, and negotiated endings. Justice in the Dark came back from the dead, not whole, not free, but alive enough to close its story. And maybe that's what survival looks like now. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, consider liking or subscribing for more deep dives like this. I hope this pause in the chaos made you think. If it did, do you see this as hope for BL, or proof of how narrow the path has become? Until next time, this is GPkP.